There's a moment that almost everyone experiences at some point in their life, and it usually comes after disappointment. It might be after another relationship ends in the exact same way as the last one, or after you find yourself in yet another friendship where you feel unseen, unappreciated, or taken for granted, or even in your career, where different environments somehow start to feel eerie familiar, like you've been here before emotionally, even if everything on the surface looks different. And then the thought comes in quietly but persistent. Why does this keep happening to me? Not in a dramatic way, not even in a victim mindset necessarily, but in a genuinely confused way, because logically it doesn't make sense. You've grown, you've learned, you've become more aware, you've even tried to make different choices. And yet, somehow, the same types of people, the same emotional experiences, the same dynamics keep finding their way back into your life. Different face, same feeling. And this is the part where most people usually split into two directions. One path is blaming others completely, thinking people are just like this, or there's no good people out there, or I just have bad luck. And the other path is internalizing it too harshly, thinking there must be something wrong with me, or why can't I get it right? But the truth sits somewhere deeper than both of those, because this isn't about luck, and it's not about something being wrong with you. It's about patterns. And more importantly, it's about what those patterns are trying to show you. Because repetition in life is never random. When something keeps showing up, especially in the form of people or emotional experiences, it's usually because there is something within you that is still aligned with it. And I know that might feel uncomfortable to hear, and not because it means you're doing something wrong, but because it shifts the focus away from what's happening outside of you and brings it inward. And that's where the real work begins. Because attraction isn't just about what you consciously want, it's about what you unconsciously believe, expect, and feel familiar with. And that is where a lot of people get stuck because they think, but I don't want this. And that is true. Consciously, you don't. But your subconscious doesn't operate based on what you want. It operates based on what it knows and what it has been conditioned to recognize as normal, what it has learned to associate with connection, love, and safety, even if those associations aren't actually healthy. So when you find yourself attracting the same types of people, it's not because you're trying to. It's because there is something within you that still recognizes that dynamic as familiar. And familiarity is powerful, more powerful than desire in many cases, because the human mind is wired to gravitate toward what feels known, even if what feels known doesn't feel good. And this is where we start to understand that attraction isn't just about external magnetism, it's about internal alignment. And not alignment in the sense of being perfect or healed, but alignment in the sense of your internal world matching what you continue to experience externally. So if you constantly find yourself in relationships where you feel like you have to prove your worth, there may be a part of you that still believes love has to be earned. If you keep attracting emotionally unavailable people, there may be a part of you that has learned to associate love with distance, inconsistency, or uncertainty. And if you find yourself in situations where your boundaries are crossed, there may be a part of you that hasn't fully claimed your right to be respected. And again, this isn't about blame, it's about awareness. Because once you can see the patterns clearly, you can begin to understand it. And once you understand it, you can start to change it. But here's where it gets deeper, because these patterns don't just come from nowhere. They are usually rooted in early experiences and the way you first learned what love looked like, what connection felt like, what you had to do to be accepted, valued, or chosen. And those lessons aren't always obvious. Sometimes they come from subtle dynamics, from emotional environments that taught you things without ever saying them out loud. Maybe you learned that being easygoing kept the peace, so now you struggle to express your needs. Maybe you learned that love came with inconsistency, so now stability feels unfamiliar or even boring. Maybe you learned that you had to be more in some ways to be chosen. So now you overgive, overextend, or overcompensate in relationships. And the thing is, these patterns don't just disappear because you become aware of them intellectually. They live in your nervous system. They live in your emotional responses. They show up in your instincts, in who you feel drawn to, and what feels exciting versus what feels off. So even when you consciously try to choose differently, your body might still pull you toward what feels familiar. And this is why change can feel so difficult because you're not just changing your choices, you're changing your conditioning, you're changing what feels normal. And that takes time and intention and honesty because healing isn't just about recognizing the pattern, it's about sitting with the part of you that learned it, understanding why it formed, and then gently, consistently showing yourself a new way. And this is where we shift into something really important because a lot of people think healing means avoiding certain types of people. But healing isn't just about avoidance, it's about transformation because you can avoid someone who is emotionally unavailable. But if you haven't shifted the part of you that is drawn to that dynamic, it will show up again in a different form. Healing is about becoming someone who no longer resonates with that experience, not through force, but through internal change, through self concept, through the way you see yourself, the way you value yourself, the way you expect to be treated. Because your self concept is the foundation of everything you attract, not in a superficial way, but in a deeply energetic and psychological way. If you see yourself as someone who is always overlooked, you may unconsciously accept situations where you are not prioritized. If you see yourself as someone who has to work for love, you may find yourself in dynamics where love feels conditional. If you see yourself as someone who isn't fully chosen, you may tolerate half hearted connections. And this is where the real shift begins, not by trying to control who comes into your life, but by changing how you show up within yourself. Because when your self concept changes, your standards change, your boundaries change, your tolerance changes. And naturally, what you attract begins to change as well. But here's something that doesn't get talked about enough. When you start to shift, it can feel uncomfortable because you're stepping into unfamiliar territory. You might start saying no where you used to say yes. You might start pulling back where you used to overgive. You might start questioning dynamics that you once accepted without thinking. And that can feel unsettling, not because it's wrong, but because it's new. And growth often feels like discomfort before it feels like alignment. But this discomfort is usually a sign that something is changing, that you are no longer operating from the same place, that you are beginning to break the pattern. And as you continue this process, something interesting happens. The same types of people may still appear, but your response to them is different. What once felt attractive now feels misaligned, and what once felt normal now feels draining. And instead of getting pulled in, you recognize it, you see it for what it is, and you choose differently. And that's when you know the cycle is breaking, not because those people no longer exist, but because they no longer have a place in your life. And this is where we can bring in a deeper layer of understanding. Because from a more spiritual perspective, these repeated experiences are not punishments. They are invitations, opportunities for awareness, for growth, for alignment. And this is where concepts like the law of assumption come into play because what you assume to be true about yourself and your relationships shapes your experiences. If you assume that people will disappoint you, you may unconsciously expect it, anticipate it, and even interpret neutral situations through that lens. If you assume that you are deeply valued and respected, you begin to carry yourself differently. You respond differently. You choose differently. And those assumptions begin to reflect back to you. Not instantly, not perfectly, but consistently over time. And this is why healing isn't about becoming perfect. It's about becoming aware, about becoming intentional, about choosing to rewrite the internal narratives that have been running in the background. And this doesn't happen overnight. It happens in moments, in small decisions, in the way you speak to yourself, in the way you respond to situations, in the way you allow or don't allow certain behaviors. And slowly, those moments add up. They create a new baseline, a new normal. And from that place, your reality begins to shift. But let's talk about something real for a second, because sometimes, even when you understand all of this, there can still be a part of you that feels tired, tired of doing the work, tired of reflecting, tired of feeling like you have to figure something out every time something doesn't go the way you hoped. And that feeling is valid because growth isn't always easy, but it's also not meant to feel like a constant struggle. At some point, it becomes more natural, more integrated, less about effort and more about embodiment. And that's the space you're moving toward, where you don't have to overthink everything, where you don't have to analyze every interaction, where you simply know what aligns with you and what doesn't, and you trust yourself enough to act on that knowing. And that's really what this journey is about. Not changing what you attract, but changing your relationship with yourself. Because when you trust yourself, when you value yourself, when you feel secure within yourself, you stop settling for the experiences that don't reflect that. And naturally, your external world begins to match that internal shift. So, if you've been finding yourself in the same cycles with the same types of people having the same emotional experiences, instead of asking, why does this keep happening to me? Try asking, what is this trying to show me? What part of me is still aligned with this? What belief, expectation, or pattern is still active within me? Not from a place of blame, but from a place of curiosity. Because within that curiosity, there is power, there is clarity, there's the ability to shift, and you don't have to do it all at once. You don't have to have everything figured out. You just have to be willing to see yourself honestly and choose little by little to show up differently. And over time, those patterns that once felt endless will begin to fade. And in their place, something new will emerge, something that actually reflects who you are becoming. And that's when you realize it was never about attracting different people. It was about becoming someone who experiences something different. And that changes everything. Thank you for joining me for another episode of Adeana's Diary. Don't forget to follow so you never miss an episode. Brand new episodes are released every Wednesday at 9 a.m. on your favorite platforms: Spotify, Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and Podbean.